If anyone had told me last Friday that I'd wake up in my new coach's bed, I would have laughed, called them insane, and gone back to stretching in the locker room. But here I was shirtless, groggy, and staring into the steel-blue eyes of the man who now looked at me like I belonged to him. It started with a storm, not the kind you see on weather apps, but one of those sudden, heavy downpours that makes the streets steam and forces you to make choices you wouldn't otherwise make. My apartment was across town, the buses were stalled, and Coach Mason, brand new to the team, mysterious, and already the subject of every locker room whisper, offered me a ride. His truck smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, something I couldn't name but wanted to breathe in forever. "You'll get soaked," he'd said, leaning against the open passenger door like it was the most natural thing in the world to rescue me. His voice was low, smooth, carrying that unspoken alpha confidence that made my chest tighten. I climbed in, half out of necessity, half because something about him made saying no impossible. We were supposed to just get me home. That was the plan. But when the rain turned into a flash flood and my street disappeared under brown water, Mason didn't hesitate. He took me back to his place. I'd expected a typical coach's apartment. Cheap furniture, maybe a few mismatched dishes. Instead, his place felt lived in. Warm, heavy curtains, a faint crackle from a fireplace, the smell of fresh coffee even though it was late. He tossed me a towel and told me to take the shower. By the time I stepped out, hair dripping, wearing the oversized t-shirt he'd given me, he was waiting with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. We talked. God, we talked. About the team, about why he'd moved here, about how I'd ended up in track in the first place. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. But the way his eyes stayed on me, the way he seemed to listen like nothing else in the world mattered, yeah. That did something to me. 1 mug turned into 2. The couch turned into the floor in front of the fireplace. And somewhere between my laughter and his quiet stories, I fell asleep leaning against him. When I woke up, I wasn't on the floor anymore. I was in his bed. And he was there, one arm slung over my waist, his breathing slow and deep. My first instinct was panic. But before I could move, his hand tightened just slightly, not enough to trap me, but enough to make it clear he knew I was awake. "Morning," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. Then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he pressed his forehead against my temple. "You stayed. Good." I should have pulled away. I should have said something casual, made a joke, anything to break the tension. But instead I stayed, because something in me didn't want to leave. The days that followed were strange. Mason didn't act like the night had been a mistake. If anything, he acted like it had been inevitable. He started showing up outside practice to walk me home. He'd stand closer than necessary during drills, his hand briefly touching my shoulder, my back, my wrist, always warm, always steady. And every time I looked at him, I saw that same quiet claim in his eyes. At first, I told myself it was just Mason being Mason. Maybe he was like this with everyone. Maybe it was just his alpha energy, something he couldn't help. But then I caught the way his gaze darkened whenever another guy on the team laughed too loud with me. The way his jaw tightened when I texted during cooldowns. The way his fingers brushed mine when he handed me my water bottle, lingering like he wasn't ready to let go. It was possessive, and it should have bothered me, but it didn't. If anything, it thrilled me. Still, I couldn't ignore the whispers. The other guys noticed. Someone joked in the locker room about how I was coach's favorite, and the look Mason gave shut him up instantly. The kind of look that promised consequences. I wasn't naive. I knew this could blow up. Coach-player relationships were complicated, sometimes forbidden. But the more time I spent with him, the harder it became to care about rules. Then came the turning point. We were running late after practice one night, the locker room already empty. I was pulling on my hoodie when Mason stepped in, locking the door behind him. My heart jumped. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low but not angry, just certain. "I haven't." "You have," he interrupted, stepping closer until I had to tilt my chin to look at him. "And you should know I don't like it." I swallowed hard, my back hitting the lockers. His hand came up, not to grab me, but to rest against the metal beside my head. close enough that I could feel his body heat, smell the faint cedar on his skin. "Mason, you stayed that night," he said, softer now, "and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. I think about the way you looked at me, the way you didn't pull away. I couldn't move. My pulse was loud in my ears. "Tell me to back off and I will," he murmured. "But if you don't, I'm going to kiss you." I should have said something. Instead, I closed the distance myself. His lips were warm, sure, claiming but careful, like he was memorizing me. And when his hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, I knew I wasn't going to fight this. The weeks after that blurred into something I can only describe as dangerous happiness. We hit it, but barely. Late-night runs that ended in his apartment. His hand on my back when no one was looking. The way he called me mine when we were alone. The word sending a thrill through me every time. It wasn't all easy. There were fights, small ones, mostly about his protectiveness. Once, I snapped at him for glaring at a friend of mine during a meet. He apologized later, pulling me against his chest like he was afraid I'd slip away. And maybe that was the strangest part, how an alpha who could command a whole team seemed almost vulnerable when it came to me. Like under all that strength and confidence, there was a man who'd been alone too long, and I'd stumbled right into the empty space he'd been guarding. By the time the season ended, I knew two things for sure. One, Mason wasn't going to let me go. Two, I wasn't going to ask him to. So yeah, maybe I hadn't planned on spending that night with him. But now, when he looked at me like I was his whole world, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not even a little. Because somewhere between that storm and this moment, he'd stopped being just my coach. And I'd stopped wanting him to be anything less than mine. The first crack in our perfect little secret came during the state qualifiers. The stadium was buzzing, the air thick with adrenaline. I had just finished my heat when I spotted him on the sidelines, arms crossed. That intense gaze locked on me like I was the only person in the world. I jogged over, still catching my breath. "We're doing good," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't smile. "You're pushing too hard on the turns. You'll burn out in the finals." I rolled my eyes. "Relax, coach. I've got this." But the way his jaw tightened told me he wasn't talking just about the race. Later, in the locker room, I found out why. "You didn't tell me you were having dinner with James last night," he said the moment we were alone. I froze. "He's just a friend. Doesn't matter. You could have said something." "Mason, you're not the word caught in my throat. Not my boyfriend? Not my mate? Not my something?" He stepped forward, eyes dark. "Not your what?" The silence stretched between us, heavy and sharp. Then I sighed, dropping my gaze. "I didn't think I had to report everything to you." His hand curled into a fist, then slowly relaxed. "You don't. But I need you to understand, when it comes to you, I don't do halfway. I don't do casual. That night, I didn't go home with him. I needed space. Or maybe I just needed to see if I could breathe without him near. 2 days later, I found out I couldn't. We made it to the finals, but the pressure was eating at me. My start was sloppy, my legs felt like lead. By the third lap, I knew I was losing. And then, over the roar of the crowd, I heard him. "Come on, Liam. This is yours." His voice cut through the noise, sharp and sure. Something inside me snapped into place. I ran like my life depended on it, crossing the finish line with a chest burning, leg screaming final burst. When the official called my name, announcing me as the winner, I barely heard the applause. My eyes went straight to him. He was smiling, not the polite smile he gave reporters, but the real one, the one that reached his eyes. After the ceremony, I found him waiting by the exit tunnel. He didn't say a word, just pulled me into his arms. For a moment, I forgot the cameras, the crowd, everything but the feel of him holding me like he'd never let go. "I'm sorry," I whispered against his chest. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "For what?" "For making you feel like I didn't care. I do. More than I should." His thumb brushed my cheek. "Then don't fight me on this anymore. I'm not sure I can." "Good," he said. And then he kissed me right there, in front of God and the entire stadium. The gasps and murmurs didn't matter. For once, I didn't care who knew. Things didn't magically get easier after that. The athletic board called us in for a meeting. They reminded Mason about professional boundaries, hinted at consequences if our relationship affected the team. He listened politely, then told them, "I won't apologize for caring about him." We agreed to keep our public displays low-key, at least during the season. But in private, nothing changed. If anything, we grew closer. I started leaving things at his apartment without thinking, running shoes by the door, a spare hoodie draped over his couch. He started cooking dinner before I got there, waiting up when I worked late. One rainy night, months later, I found him sitting on the floor by the fireplace, just like the first night we met. He patted the spot next to him, and when I sat down, he took my hand. "You know, I didn't bring you here that night just because of the flood," he said quietly. "I wanted you here. I'd wanted it from the first time I saw you run." I smiled, leaning into him. "Guess I'm glad it rained then." He kissed the top of my head. "Me too." Looking back, I realize how close I came to walking away that first morning. How easy it would have been to chalk it up to a weird accident, to put walls back up. But I didn't. And because of that, I found something Samuel and I didn't even know I was missing. So yeah, I accidentally spent the night with my new alpha coach. And maybe that sounds reckless, maybe it even was. But the truth? I'd do it again. In a heartbeat. Because now, he's not just my coach. He's my home. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.